As I said, today we would like to build a chatbot based on the GPT-4o mini model, the OpenAI API, using Angular. It's not our goal to go deep into the API of OpenAI. It should just be a glimpse into how you work with large language models from your own software. Our main goal is to practice Angular and to practice how to work with web APIs with Angular. But it is a practical, relevant example, and therefore I decided that we give it a go. Before we start writing code, we have to think about the architecture of our overall solution. Let me draw a little bit here on this canvas. So let's go here. Imagine that you have, maybe do it like that. Imagine that you have your OpenAI API somewhere in the cloud. It's here. Then out here, you have your Angular client. I will use the abbreviation NG for Angular, okay? Now, theoretically, we could, let me switch the color here. Theoretically, we could access this OpenAI API, oops. We could direct.
So you only changed it for the other side of the pen.
I see. This one. Now I made it correct. Okay, good. Sorry. We could access the OpenAI API from Angular directly. We could do that. But trust me, it's not a good idea. Does anybody have an idea why? Yes?
Because you need verification.
Exactly. You need verification, or let's call it authentication. If you use the OpenAI API, you need an API key. If you put the API key inside of your Angular application, what's going to happen? Yep.
People will see it in the code.
Exactly. They will simply press F12 to go to the developer tools. Inside the developer tools, they will take a look at your code. Somewhere in your code, they find the API key, and then they are going to use the API key to access OpenAI on your costs. So you have to pay for all the, let's say, hackers who extract the API key and use it, and it's your credit card that's going to be charged. So this is something that we want to avoid. You have a question?
Most of the time, you can just verify yourself on their platform, then you get a private key. There's also like your ID.
Mm-hmm.
Then you send them per params.
Yep.
With the private key.
Yep.
Most of the time you use environmental variables.
Yep. That is true. All that you say is true for services, for APIs, which were designed to be used from the browser client.
Okay.
But the OpenAI API has not been designed to be used from a browser client. So what you are talking about is something like OpenID Connect as an authentication or trust delegation protocol. That's a very good idea, but unfortunately OpenAI doesn't support OpenAI Connect, OpenID Connect. So therefore, this is not an option. But very good thinking, I like that. But the OpenAI API was built to be accessed by a server and not by a client. And with server, I mean a computer that can keep a secret, that can store a secret safely, so you must not transfer the secret to the browser client. That's a very bad idea. So this version is not a good idea. Let's remove all this stuff here again. Exactly. Oh, that was correct. And think about what we have to do. Now, let's use a different color here and introduce our own little server here. So we create our own API, and now the Angular application will access the server, and the server will then access OpenAI. And we can keep the API key here as a secret on the server. This is what we need. However, well, in practice, you would spend quite a lot of time implementing such server APIs, and we are going to do that in the second semester. when we learn about ASP.NET Core Minimal API and things like that. For now, we haven't touched the server, and therefore we would like to make our life a little bit easier. What we are going to do is we are not going to implement the server, but we are using a reverse proxy. Do you already know what a reverse proxy is? Do you know what a proxy is? What is a proxy? Some of you are nodding. So what is a proxy? When do you use a proxy? Have you ever used a proxy before? Yes?
It's when you access a proxy server, the proxy server accesses the internet for you.
Exactly. Exactly. In many companies, you are required to use a proxy. So they set up a proxy. If you want to go into the internet, you connect to the proxy, and the proxy is then connecting to the internet. Why? Why do large companies do that? Yeah?
Mostly to restrict websites.
To restrict websites, for instance, they don't. Yeah.
Keep you safe from the internet. Mostly.
Yeah, exactly. For instance, they don't want their employees to play games while they work in the company, so they block certain addresses. Also, logging, for instance, is an important thing. So proxy servers access the internet on your behalf, correctly. Now, what do you think is a reverse proxy? Do you have a question?
Also, do we on the school also have proxy?
We have proxies, but you are also allowed to access the internet directly, but we have then firewalls, which will do a similar job. But at the end of the day, yes, there are proxies. For instance, if we do an exam in one of our IT rooms and we turn off the internet, I can selectively turn on certain websites on the internet, but then you have to use a proxy to access the internet, because the proxy can still access the internet while you in the IT room during the exam are locked out from the internet. And for that, we, for instance, use a proxy. Yeah, so if I want you to access this API during the exam, I can ask you to use a proxy and then enable this API. All the rest of the IT room is turned on. Got it? So what could be a reverse proxy? Yeah?
I'm not completely sure, but I use it on my server.
Yeah.
To map certain routes after my IP to certain ports on my server.
Exactly. Port forwarding is something similar. Exactly. And what we are going to do, we are setting up a reverse proxy. This reverse proxy runs on something like localhost, let's say port 3000, something like this. So here we have port 4200. So this Angular application is accessing then the localhost 3000. This localhost 3000 takes every request that comes in, simply replaces the address by an address to OpenAI, and injects the API key here on your behalf. So in Angular, you never have an API key. Never. You simply access a local service. In real world, this would be maybe a locked down network segment, or maybe this API supports OpenID Connect, something like this. But then the API key is injected automatically when accessing the OpenAI server. Got it? Don't worry, I've prepared this reverse proxy for you. It's only, I don't know, 10 lines of JavaScript code, something like this. It's really, really simple to set up. And I'm going to show you how you set up your reverse proxy after a short break. Okay? Good. See you in a second. Okay, so let's get started. Before the break, we discussed the general architecture of the application that we want to build together. And the first thing that we need is our reverse proxy. Please take the GitHub repository for our course. If you forgot where it is, let me quickly send you the GitHub repo link using Discord. I just sent it to you, and here in Help Us, you find the ChatGPT proxy application. And please clone the application. Please clone the GitHub repository. Go into this folder, and then I'm not sure if you are familiar with Node.js. You simply call npm install to install all the dependencies, and then wait a second, because we have to talk about the secrets that need to be created inside a .env file. I will wait a second so that everybody can clone the repository. If you cloned it before, please do a git pull. in order to refresh all the files, and then go into this folder, as I said, and run an npm install. Okay, so you have this proxy, and let's take a look at this proxy. I open it up here in Cursor, and as you can see, what we do here in this application is I'm calling this .env. Are you familiar with .env? It's a very famous package, you all know it. Then we use Express. Did you already do some Express.js development? Wonderful. I'm using Course. Are you familiar with Course? Yes? Fine. Super. And this is the proxy middleware. So this reverse proxy simply takes all requests coming in at the root and rewrites the request a little bit. To be technically exact, today we are not going to use OpenAI directly, but instead we are going to use Azure OpenAI. Azure is the Microsoft cloud, and I deployed my own OpenAI in Europe. It's running in Sweden in Azure, so we are going to use my own deployment of OpenAI in the Azure cloud. So don't worry. This is why why we need this Azure API key here and why we need this Azure endpoint here. If you would like to try that on your own using OpenAI directly, you would need to change this code a little bit because authentication in Azure works a little bit different from authentication in OpenAI. By the way, if you would like to do some experiments with large language models and you do not want to pay for large language models because you are a student and students typically don't have a lot of money, then my best tip for you would be to use Ollama. Ollama is very easy to install. It's a service that you can run locally or in Docker or whatever. And then you can use any of the models which are available there. So for instance, you could use the Phi3 model, which is an open source model also provided by Microsoft. And all you need to do, once you have installed Ollama, you need to run Ollama run Phi3. You can replace Phi3 with any other model that you would like to run. So you can run the Meta's Llama model, you can run Mistral, you can run whatever model you like. It's a single line of code. Ollama run name of the model, and it will simply run everything locally on your PC. Of course, you need to have enough RAM, you need to have enough resources, you need to have maybe a GPU to get a decent answering speed, but that's a different story. And once you got that, you can go to GitHub, and in GitHub, you have the documentation of the REST API somewhere. Here, somewhere, no, this is the web, blah, blah, blah. Somewhere inside here is a link to the documentation of the REST API. So you have then Ollama with your custom large language model running on your computer, and you can use exactly the same demo without using Azure, without using OpenAI, just everything running locally. But don't get the wrong impression. The models that we use here are way more powerful and way larger than the typical models that you can run on your laptops. This is why we are going to use OpenAI. But maybe in your own project, you want to do something locally, I wanted to point out Ollama. It's a really good option to try things locally, okay? But for now, we are going to use Azure. Well, the rest is history. We are adding the proxy and we are running everything locally on port 3000. That should work like a charm. Now here you see an .env.template file. And as you can see here, there are just 3 dots, Azure Endpoint and Azure API Key. Now you need an Azure Endpoint and an Azure API Key. So please take out your credit cards and enter. No, I'm just joking. Of course you will get an Azure Endpoint and API Key from me. And don't get the wrong impression, I have to pay for this stuff. Okay, so use it, it's not a problem. You will just spend a few euro cents, it's not a problem. But do not publish this API key on the internet. Don't put it on X or somewhere else. Don't send it to your colleagues. Don't do mass tests on this API keys. I have to pay for them, okay? They are for your homework only. It's fine if you do some hundreds or thousands of requests, it's perfectly fine. But if you start doing millions of requests, I maybe get a little bit unrelaxed, okay? Good. I will now stop the recording and give you the API keys. Good? Okay, now you've got the API key. Now we can run this proxy just by saying node app.js. And then we have a proxy server running on port 3000. Woohoo! Wonderful. So what we now have is we have this box in the middle that I drew before. So we have this API. It's not a handwritten API doing some business logic. It's really just forwarding requests coming in through localhost 3000, and it's going to forward everything to the Azure OpenAI endpoint. Do you want to see how that looks like in Azure? I can show you that for a second, okay? So just to get an idea. Many enterprise customers are using Azure OpenAI over OpenAI directly because Azure OpenAI has a bunch of security features which are important to large customers and large corporations. And therefore, those large corporations are preferring Azure OpenAI. So you see, this is my deployment of Azure OpenAI. It's currently running in Sweden Central. I have a bunch of configuration possibilities. And here under keys and endpoints, you see I have the API key, which is currently hidden, and the endpoint. So this is where our reverse proxy is going to forward the requests to. Okay? In real life applications, this would be a security nightmare. In real life applications, you never, ever use API keys like that. Instead, there is a technology which is called managed identity. It's not relevant for this course, but maybe you want to remember that. Managed identity allows you to manage everything using Entra ID, which is the new name for Azure Active Directory. Have you heard about Active Directory before?
Yes.
The new name is called Entra ID, and therefore, in practice, you would use Entra ID with managed identity. But here in school, it would be too complicated to set everything up, so I simply gave you the key. And once the homework is done, next week, I will revoke the key, and you will no longer have access to this environment. Okay? Good. You have a question?
Why are there two keys?
Why are there two keys? Does anybody have an idea? Zero downtime migration. If you have an API key, a secret key, then it's not a question if your API key gets ever lost. It's only a question when. So for some reason, maybe somebody screws up and puts the API key on GitHub in a public repository. So what could you do? If there would be only a single key, how could you change the key without having a downtime in your application? If I click on regenerate key, your application would immediately lose access to this service. So this is why they offer you two keys. So your application works with key 1. What you can do is you can switch your application to key 2. Then you can regenerate key 1. Then you can switch back from key 2 to key 1. And then you can regenerate key 2. And by switching these two keys, you can ensure that your application is always up and running and you have zero downtime. This is the reason why these systems always have two keys and not just one. Okay? Good. Or more. If you use OpenAI directly, you can create as many keys as you want, but Azure always has two. Good, very good. So you have seen how this works. The proxy is running. So now I think we can get started and create our Angular app, right? Of course, I have prepared everything, but I do not want to give you the prepared application because we are here to practice, right? So the first thing that we are going to do is we are going to create an Angular application just to make sure that we can remember everything. It's important to exercise. So let's go into our HackMD workspace for this course. And in the HackMD workspace, as you can probably remember, there is a template for creating an Angular application. And it's exactly here in the Getting Started notes. So just copy the whole line, open up a shell, whatever shell you use. This is the wrong for me, so I want to use that one. Good. And I'm going to create my application. I'm going to call this one the flower bot. You will understand later why I call it the flower bot. This is the directory, and I will call it flower bot with a dash. That is the name of the Angular application. Everything else, just as we practiced in the last weeks over and over again. We want to use routing. We do not care about testing currently. We want to use standalone components. We want to use strict type checking in TypeScript. We want to use CSS. We want to use Shadow DOM for view encapsulation, no server-side rendering, and then the Angular app gets created. You have a question?
Where are you creating the Angular?
It doesn't matter. Wherever you want it.
Not in the same folder as the GD folder.
It's not necessary to put it in the same folder. Do it wherever you want to put it. Wherever you want to put it. Once you have it, open it up in your favorite editor. In my case, I'm going to use Cursor again. I recently switched as a self-experiment 100% from Visual Studio Code to Cursor. And so far, I'm pretty happy with it. But we'll see how things go. Please do the same. Does anybody need more time to create the Angular app? Yes, please. Okay, I'll pause the recording. Nice. So everybody created the Angular application. Let's do a little bit of housekeeping. As you all know, in the source app folder, we got in the application component HTML a bunch of marketing blah, which we immediately delete because we don't want it. That's the first stuff that we need to do. The second thing, let's do minimal styling. I prefer a different font. So let's do a font family. And I am going to use Lucida. But you can choose any font that you want. It's really up to you which font you prefer. I want to have the width of our page limited. So if I have a very wide screen, the page should only use, let's say, I don't know, approximately 1000 pixels, something like this. So I'm going to do a body here. I'm going to use a display flex, and I'm going to use a max width of, I don't know, 50 RAM, something like this, and a margin 0 auto to center everything. And then I'm going to go for app root, and I would like to say this is a width of 100% to make it fill the entire screen. So that should be okay. Just to repeat, font, I think that's clear. This is just centering everything and limiting the width. So if you have a huge monitor, something like this, then it will only take a little bit of space in the middle to make it easier to read. And last but not least, I'm making sure that our app root, this is this one here, takes in the entire space horizontally. So I'm saying width 100%. And I think that is pretty okay. With that, I want to start my Angular application, npm start. And if we are lucky, if the demo gods are smiling, then we should see our beautiful Angular application, which is currently empty. No error, it runs, everything is empty. Last housekeeping step, we need to create a component so that we can write a little bit of code inside of that component. npx ng generate component. I will call it answer question component. That gives us the answer question component. That's good. And the last thing that we need in order to see something, and then I will give you time to catch up. This shouldn't be anything new. We need a route. In the routes, I'm going to say path, and let's call it answer question, which is the answer question component, exactly that one, and to a redirect to. And if everything works out correctly, we see answer question works. and this is exactly what you need. I ask you to redo all these steps. I'm consciously removing my code here from the screen because now you should already be able to perform all these steps that we just did just from the top of your mind. That should be routine work by now. Wonderful. So you all created this component. Now we want to do a little bit of HTML inside of our component so that we have some meaningful way of entering the question and displaying the response. I am going to use an H2 and I'm just simply say answer question. Yeah, that's fine. Then I'm going to set up a form. I don't know what's inside the form. Well, I know a little bit about it. It will definitely be a label, something like this, and there will definitely be an input, but this is of course not enough. And finally, there will be a submit button. Yep, that is pretty obvious. And down here, let's simply display in a paragraph tag, let's display, I don't know, the answer. Of course, this doesn't work yet because we haven't created the signals that we want to use. Let's make our form a little bit more complete. Type text is okay. I want to use the ID question. That's fine. Let's give it a name. Let's also use question here. What else do we do? Let's add a placeholder. Enter your question here, something like this. So let me make it like this so you see it a little bit better. Okay, that is fine. That's okay. So maybe let's get rid of that one so that we can try it. Okay, that is not super beautiful, but it is somewhat okay. Now the styling that I would like to have is I would like to have the question on top, and then I would like to have the input box taking up all the space, and then I would like to add the button here on the right hand side. This is the layout that I want. So let's do a little bit of CSS to make this work. It's only a little bit of CSS. Well, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to say form label, and the label should be display block. Display block means that the label should now be on top. So there will be a break, a line break after the label. So this is the first thing that I do. The next thing that I do is I would like to say form button, something like this. I would like to say margin left of, let's use 0.5 rem, something like this. So that gives us a little bit of space here. Now, in order to make this line here take up the entire space, I'm going to use flex layout. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my button and the input file in a div. Let's do it like that. I'm just thinking how I want it to do. Oops, sorry. What did I do wrong? Why is form complaining? Closing tag, where, what? What did I do wrong? Div. Oh, let's undo that. Oh, I didn't do the... Yes, I did. Okay, I don't see the mistake. Well, maybe it's a fluke. Form, label, div, input, button, div. I don't see my mistake. Do you see my mistake? Ah, now it's gone. For whatever reason. Okay, good. It's gone. It was correct. It's just a fluke. Okay. So the reason why I did the div here is because now in CSS, I can make a little bit of CSS magic. I can say form div, and I can say display flex. That display flex. Exactly. That doesn't do any trick. So if I do that, nothing changes. But now I can say form div input, something like this, and I can say flex 1. And that means that, yeah, exactly. This is what I wanted to have. See, we are expanding the first element of the flex box to the maximum width. So if I have a smaller screen size, As you can see, I'm using the entire space here, but if I have a very wide monitor, we are limiting the size to a certain amount. We are centering everything, and the input field, which might become a little bit longer, should be in the middle. Do you like this layout? I hope you do. I just wanted to show you how I approach this problem. Of course, in reality, you would maybe use something like Tailwind CSS. We heard about it. But here in the school, we decided that we want to go really foundational. So we just use CSS. So you get a little bit of CSS skills. And once you master CSS, it's a very good idea in practice to use something like Tailwind or Bootstrap or Angular Material or ShadCN or whatever you want to use in order to do more nicer UIs. Let's put it that way. Well, if you want, you can add a little bit of margins to make it a little bit nicer. I will, for instance, say here, I'm going to say 0.5 RAM and 0 and something like this. That gives us a little bit of space here. Maybe the input field could use a little bit of padding, something like this. That gives the input field a little bit more spacing around it. I really like that. And the answer button could be a little bit larger, so it's easier to get it. And also use a padding of 0.5. Let's even pump that up a little bit, something like this. Exactly. I like that. Yep. Oh, I made a mistake. Form button, it's already here. I can combine these two. Okay, so I think that's decent layout. I can live with that. If you want to enhance anything, do fancy colors or whatever, feel free. But that's it. I will keep this on the screen. If you have any questions about the CSS, just let me know. Nothing special here. Now, in the input field, the user should enter his or her question. In the upcoming tests, we will regularly, for many, many times, enter a question to test our application. And it's somewhat boring to always re-enter the questions. So I want to provide some sample question that the user can easily pick from. My question to you is, do you know the HTML data list tag? Have you ever heard of the data list tag? Yes, no, maybe? Okay, I see some nodding, some saying no. Let me show you how you can use the data list tag. It's really, really nice. After the input, you simply say, I want to add a data list. Give this data list an ID, please. I will call it suggestions. And then, in the data list, you will define an option. And in the option, you can, for instance, enter questions that you would like to try afterwards. I will say, are dolphin fish? That would be a simple question. Or what could it be? Another question. Give me a checklist for a good body weight training. Or what else could we ask? Option. What should I view as a tourist in Vienna? Okay. Enter any questions. You do not need to go with my questions. You can enter any questions as long as they are child friendly. Otherwise, the profanity checker from Azure OpenAI will decline answering your questions. So please keep them non-violent, no sexual explicit language, no self-harm language, things like that, because there is a filter in OpenAI and we would not get answers on these types of questions. Okay, so this data list, if you want to have it, you simply say up here in the input, you say list equals to the suggestions. And once you assign the data list to the input, you immediately get here a drop down, and you see, I can just click on that and I get the example. Isn't that nice? Of course, we could now use CSS to make the styling more interesting, but I think you get the point, right? It's not a select. It's really just a list of suggestions that the browser will show you to make it easier for you to fill out the form, you can afterwards edit the question in the form. So you learned something about HTML today. Good. Fine, so we have a UI. So now we can go and think about the TypeScript which will back our UI. The first thing is we are going to use data binding, so we need an import. Does anybody remember which import we need to have things like two-way data binding, banana in a box binding? Forms module, exactly. Please remember that. That is definitely relevant for your next exam. Forms module. We're going to use the forms module. Now inside of our component, we need a binding for the question, which is a signal empty at the beginning. Then we need an answer, definitely. And with these two signals, we can already go into the HTML and do some data binding. In the input, we do a banana in a box binding, which will be the question without the brackets. Something like this. And down here, we are going to use the answer. And that should not change anything. It should simply work. Answer, yeah, it's here. The error will disappear in a second. Can I remember? Signal of string in this case, very simple. We did that before. Then you use a banana in a box binding for the ng modal. That is a two-way binding. And down here, I'm using a simple interpolation where I'm getting the value of answer. Now let's do the form. Let's do a submit handling and maybe call this answer question. That sounds good. So I can go here, answer question, something like this. And all I'm going to do, I'm going to say this.answer.set is question, something like this. So I'm simply copying the question into the answer, just to make sure that it works. This is how I typically program. I make baby steps, very, very simple steps, and I try every single step before I move on. So now I can go here, I can type in blah, 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 click on answer, it's copying it down. I know that my bindings work. Please remember that. Also for your exams. I see way too many students sitting down, writing dozens and dozens of lines of code before they try it. Don't do that. Write a few lines of code. 2, 3, 5, maybe 10. Find a way to test your application. Later on, you are going to use unit tests. For now, just run your app and see whether it works. And only then you take the next step. Okay? Baby steps. Does it work? Okay, I'll help everybody overcome any problems. Okay, right before the break, we finished the general web UI with the possibility to enter questions, and now we need to add some logic to it. So we need to call the web APIs from OpenAI. Now, let me quickly introduce you to the very, very basics of interacting with the GPT models from OpenAI. There is a URL which is called platform.openai.com. I will copy it into Discord so you have it for your reference. Come on, why didn't it copy it? Try it again. Yes, here we are. Good. You do not need to open it now, it's just for your future reference. If I go to API reference, there is essentially one API which we need, and that is the chat API. Here you see the chat API, and the only API that we need is the create chat completion. Let me describe how that works. Here on the right-hand side, you see a sample request that you can send to OpenAI. Don't worry about the URL. There is a slight difference between the URL in Azure OpenAI and OpenAI itself. So it will look a little bit different to what you see here. From then on, everything else is really similar. As you can see, I'm in authorization. I told you already, you do not need to care because this is done by the proxy server. Everything we are interested in starts here. That's the HTTP body. And the important thing here is that we are, for the first time in this year's class, using a POST request instead of a GET request. Last week, we practiced the GET request to get My Little Ponies. Today, we take a look at the POST request. The big difference between the POST request and the GET request is what? The POST request has a body. We can send some data. Today, we had a lightning talk about XML. We could post XML to a web API. But more often, you find APIs that accept JSON. And this is what we are going to send. Now, what is the content of this JSON? Essentially, there are a lot of parameters. I can tell you a little bit about these parameters, but the only parameter that we need for this exercise is this one, the messages array. What you essentially send ChatGPT, no, that's wrong. What you send to the GPT large language model is a complete history of your discussion with the bot. And that is a very important thing that you have to remember. The GPT large language model has no memory. So if you ask it a question and it answers something back to you, it immediately forgets what you asked and what it answered. So if you have a follow-up question, you have to remind the large language model what it said a minute ago. So you always have to send the entire conversation from the very beginning to the large language model. First, I said this. Then, dear assistant, you say that. Then I said this. Then you said that. And now I have this question. Please answer it. And next time, I have to send one additional message in this array. Got it? So again, these large language models have no memory. You have to remind the large language model about everything that was said in the conversation. Now, in our very simple example, we are going to allow only a single question with a single answer. And it will be your homework after this lesson to enhance the bot so that it allows a back and forth, a real conversation thread. Okay, we start simple and you can enhance this then. Now, why is this really, really important? Because if you take a look at OpenAI pricing, you pay per so-called, see it here, token. Now, what is a token? Tokenizer, OpenAI. There is a website which is called Tokenizer. And here you can enter some text. For instance, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. And here, down here, you see the tokens. You see? This sentence consists only of very short English words. So therefore, every word is a token. But that doesn't need to be the case. Yeah? Suggestion. Do you see? Now we have a single word consisting of 2 tokens. If I paste in some source code, something like this, it's even worse. So if you take a look down here, you see that this source code consists of 154 tokens. And here you see that sometimes only a single letter or 2 letters make up 1 token. For instance, here we have the double quotes and the greater sign, and they make up 1 token. So essentially, you pay per token. To get an idea, we are going to use the GPT-4o mini version, and there you have to pay for input tokens $15 per 1,000,000 token. You saw the number of tokens. The output tokens are more expensive. They cost $60 per 1,000,000 output tokens. And then there are also cache tokens and batch API, and that would be too complicated to discuss all the very details here. You have a question?
How is it defined? What is a token?
That's a very good question. There is no definition what a token is. Tokens are defined by the large language model. You have to understand that similar to, I'm simplifying greatly now, okay? But similar to a keyboard where you type in the letter A and the computer has no idea what A is. It's converting the letter A into a number, 65, according to the ASCII standard or Unicode standard or whatever you use. Now, the same is true for large language models. Internally, the neural networks, the deep learning networks of large language models, they cannot work with text. So what they need is they need numbers. So therefore, they have a kind of dictionary where they accept certain input tokens and output tokens, and every token is essentially assigned a number. So somewhere inside the large language model, there is a dictionary, and in this dictionary, there is an entry which is called lower than h, and this has a number. And then internally, everything is based on numbers, on vectors. And at the end, the numbers are translated back into tokens, output tokens. Understand what I mean?
Yes.
That's essentially what's going on. So you have input, which is translated to text vectors based on token dictionaries. And at the end, you get numbers. And this is again used by, there are dictionaries which translate these numbers into text again. Same is true for image-based systems, but there the tokens aren't text elements, but pixels. Got it?
Yes.
Okay. Very greatly simplified. But I think that's the idea. This is the reason why there is a separate tokenizer for the GPT-4 models, for the GPT-3.5 models, and for the GPT-3 models, because they have different tokens. Okay, very nice. So now you understood it. And why is this relevant when it comes to the message history? Well, guess what? Try to follow. The longer the communication thread, going back and forth, the more expensive every single entry is. Because if I said something, then the assistant said something, then I said something, then the assistant said something, and that goes back and forth 50 times. The next time I say something, I have to send the entire conversation to the large language model, and I have to pay for the entire conversation. Understood? The longer the conversational thread, the more expensive every single interaction will be, because I have to send the entire stuff to the LLM and I have to pay for it. So I do not just pay for the last question, I pay for the entire conversation history. This is why many bots limit the number of interactions which are allowed in a single thread. There are, for instance, virtual boyfriends and girlfriends in the internet, where you can have a chat with a virtual boyfriend or girlfriend. And they sometimes are pretty stupid, because if you chat with them, after a certain amount of time, they forget what you said 5 minutes ago. Well, guess why? Because they are simply truncating the conversation history, because otherwise it would be too expensive. Got it? So this is the reason why these systems work like they work. Now you have an idea what this stuff is all about. Now, it's pretty clear what the role user means. This is what the user typed in. It's pretty clear what the role assistant means. This is what the GPT assistant generates. But what the heck is role system? The system prompt is a guidance for the AI how it should answer. Have you ever worked with the system prompt before? Let me show you where you can find it in ChatGPT. For instance, if I use ChatGPT here and I go to my settings, which is something, I think here. I think it is, where is this? They moved it. Where did they move it? Where did they move it? I forgot where they moved it. Where do I have to enter my
Maybe
my instructions?
Chat.
Okay, they are changing the UI every single day, and it's now here, customized ChatGPT. And what I can do is I can tell the system how to behave. I can say, what would you like ChatGPT to know about you to provide better responses? I am a professional coder. How would you like ChatGPT to respond? Funny, short, with lots of emojis. And if I say save, and if I ask a question, is HTML a programming language? Then it will answer in a funny way, adding lots of emojis. See? That is a system prompt, what we just did. So I can customize again, and this time it should answer in a very scientific and serious way, like I don't know, computer science prof would do during a public lecture, something like this. If I try that one and I ask the same question again, let's do it here. Ask the same question again. You will see that the answer is very much different. It now references other programming language and very different style of answering. But that's not just the only thing that we can do. We can also limit the scope of the AI. For instance, we can say, you are a helpful assistant in a bike shop. Help customers decide which bike is correct, which bike is best for them. E.g., mountain bike, city bike, gravel bike, etc. And now comes the important thing. If the user asks anything not bike related, tell him or her that you are not allowed to answer such questions. Do you see? I'm limiting the thing that the AI assistant should do. I can say be professional and polite. And now if I, for instance, go into a new chat here, I can say, I am looking for a bike to bring my kids into kindergarten. And it will probably, it now remembers that Rainer is looking for a bike to bring his kids into kindergarten. So, so ChatGPT will now think I have kids. It doesn't matter. As you can see, it suggests something that is meaningful. Now, if I try the same and I say, what is the name of Obelix's dog? It will hopefully not give me an answer. Why? It shouldn't. Maybe we have to remove this one. That is a typical demo effect. That's a very typical demo effect. So let's put it here and let's shout. Anything not bike related, tell him or them that you are not allowed. Let's shout at ChatGPT. Sometimes this helps. Let's try again, okay? Oh, I made a typo, but this doesn't matter. What is the name of Obelix's dog? Come on. Okay, I don't know why ChatGPT is now ignoring my customization, but I'm going to show you that system prompts will exactly work like that. So in a second we will see when we program it ourselves, then it will behave accordingly. Okay? So this is a system prompt. Yes, question.
So for example, when I have a web shop about PCs, for example,
exactly.
I can get the API key, and then
yes.
I can limit him just to answer about...
Exactly, about components, about PCs, so that nobody can come in and do their English homework with your bot on your PC component website, because that would be too expensive. Mm-hmm. They would just get around paying for ChatGPT, and this is what you don't want. This is what a system prompt is all about, okay? Good. Sorry that the demo didn't work, but you will see that it works in a second when we program it ourselves. So now you have a general idea of how to access or how to work with the most basic web API from GPT. Let's get started with it. Of course, there would be ready-made libraries with which we can interact with the API. There are packages for Node.js, for Python, for C#, and many other things, but I don't want you to use any ready-made packages because we want to practice Angular. So we are going to call the REST API directly without any support from third-party libraries. Got it? Just for exercising. In real life, you would obviously use an API, an SDK, software development. Good. We are going to practice something that we started last time. We are going to put all the interaction with ChatGPT into a service. Can you remember what services are from last week? Logic, data access logic, business logic is put into services. So please, npx ng generate service, and I will call my service OpenAI. That's good. That will give me a new OpenAI service, as you can see it here. Okay? Good. Now let's implement this service. We don't need a constructor, but we need the HTTP client. I will repeat what I told you last time. If you want to enable HTTP client, go into app.config, and in app.config, provide HTTP client with fetch. Please remember that. This is something that I expect you to know in your next exam. You need to add provide HTTP client. This will add the HTTP client to Angular dependency injection. Don't forget that. Learn that. It's necessary that you know that. Inside of our service, we can then inject the HTTP client. Private HTTP client equals to inject HTTP client. Now let's import that, and let's import that. This now tells Angular, hey Angular, I would like to use your HTTP client service. And Angular says, yes, I can provide it to you. This is why it's called a provider. Okay? That's just the basic. Now let's add a function, answer question, something like this, which gets a question as an input parameter. That is correct. I like that. And we return a promise of string that will be the answer. Can you remember the recipe which I told you last time? Return first value from, and then inside the first value from, you say this dot HTTP client, and last time we said dot get. This is what we did last time. And what do you think? Are we going to do today when we do a post request instead of a get request?
This.http client.post.
Exactly. This is exactly what we do. Now, after the post request, you learned that already last week, we can use a generic type parameter to specify the return type. We don't have a return type yet, so we simply say any. We will deal with that problem in a second. Now, the next parameter is the URL which we want to access. And this looks as follows. HTTP localhost 3000. Why? OpenAI is not running on my computer. What do we access here?
The proxy.
The proxy, exactly. This is the proxy. And the proxy will forward all the requests to OpenAI. And I looked up the URL that we need to access in Azure. I will copy it in and copy the entire URL using Discord, so you do not need to type it in. I just sent it to you via Discord. You can copy it from there. This is the URI which works in in Azure, not in OpenAI. If you want to work with OpenAI directly, you need to use, where was it? This URL. See? And in the break, you asked me about versioning, API versioning, and I just recognized they do that exactly in the way that I told you. See? So use that one. By the way, if you want to use the OpenAI API, it's really not expensive. All you need is a credit card, and then you can deposit money at OpenAI. So you can say, I want to load $5 onto my account, and then you can spend these $5, and then you can decide whether the account should be billed again or not. Understand what I mean? So you do not need thousands of dollars in order to play around with OpenAI. For $5, you can do quite a lot of experiments. It's not expensive. It's getting expensive if you have a lot of traffic. Okay, so now we have that one. And now comes the difference to the GET request. I told you before that the POST request has a body. And here we specify the body as a second parameter. And here we specify exactly that what we see here. So we specify the messages array. So what we do is we say messages, make an array, then say first thing is the role, which is of type system, and the content is, and now I would like to try something, answer like a parrot. Nah. Yeah, is there a parrot somewhere? No. Yeah, this is nice. This is nice. I will send in 2 emojis in the system prompt that will hopefully inspire ChatGPT to also answer with a lot of emojis. The second parameter is the question that the user entered. It's just the question. See? So here you have to enter the entire conversation history. And if we would have multiple questions from the user, answer from the assistant, question from the user, answer to the assistant, multiple interactions in a single conversation, we would need to send the entire conversation to the bot. There are many additional parameters that you can specify. And if you want to know about these additional parameters, please consult the documentation of OpenAI and read more details about it. You can specify how creative the system should be, how easy it should be, reproducible, and things like that. Yes?
What happens if we provide another system message?
There is only one system message, but you can specify as many user and system messages as you want. But there is only one system message.
So it would error.
It would give you probably a 400 error bad request.
Okay.
That's my guess. Yep. Good. Do you like that? Yep. Good. Very good. Now, in order to get type-safe response, we need a data type here. We need to specify a data type. And we do that by simply creating a type, and this OpenAI response data type. Here we simply need to reproduce what OpenAI tells us that they will respond down here. See, there is a long response going on here, and this is kind of boring if you have to type it in. Last time I already told you that this is something that in practice you wouldn't do manually, but this is done using Swagger, OpenAI specification. Well, for this exercise, I did it for you. I just sent it to you via Discord. This is the data type that we are interested in. I did not include all the fields that GPT will answer with. I only included those fields which are important or interesting for this exercise. Now this here, this is the answer of the chatbot. And this down here is also interesting for you because this is the number of prompts that were used for this specific request. So with OpenAI, you can find out exactly how much money you spent for every single question. You get the exact tokens, you have a price per token, and so you know how much money did I spend asking or answering this question. This is important if you build a bot, for instance, for a large company, and you want to charge people for using the bot. You need to know how much money or time or tokens did that user spend. And with this, you can find out how much they spent. Got it? Understood? So you get a very detailed, let's say, recipe, an invoice for exactly that interaction with the bot. Good. So now we can take this OpenAI response and put it here where we said any, and now we are good because the promise here in this case can now return the OpenAI response. And that's it. So for an Angular perspective, please remember, and this is exactly what we did last time. First value from, and now new, not a GET request, but a POST request. And the big difference is that for the POST request, you specify the HTTP body as the second parameter of the function. Do you have any questions about what I just told you? No? Are you curious what the OpenAI service will tell us? Well, let's give it a try. It's pretty simple to put everything what we created so far into our application here. The first thing that we need to do is we need to get access to our service. So we need to say something like, private OpenAI service, and then we need to again do the inject and inject the OpenAI service. This is the service that we just created. If you want to make it perfect, then do a read-only, but yeah, that's nice to have. Okay? Good. Now in answer question, the code is nearly trivial. We simply say const response equals to await this one. Oh, I forgot the async here. I'm sorry. And then we simply set the answer. It's a two-line. It's really just a two-line. We say await answer question. This will trigger the HTTP post request to OpenAI, well, to our proxy, and the proxy will forward the request to OpenAI. And then we simply get out the message content from what OpenAI answered us, and we put it into answer. Okay? Let's give it a try. I will ask if dolphins are fish, and let's see how much. See? Nice. Mate. That's a tricky question. The dolphin fish, also known as Mayo Dorado, be a fish indeed, and so on. Yeah. So if you don't like the speech of the parrot because it's so piratey, if you want, now you can play around with the system prompt, and this time I can say answer in German. And if I do that and ask the question again, hopefully the system will, voila, answer in German. That's the power of the system prompt. Got it? If we want to use another question, for instance, if we want to use the question, give me a checklist of good body weight training, we will see that the answer is not very good. Come on. Do you see? This is not beautiful. What is our problem? Do you spot the problem here? Yeah.
We don't have Markdown.
Exactly. This is Markdown. So what we need to do, and we will do that after the break. First, I would like to give you a little bit of time experimenting with this stuff. We will add a Markdown converter to beautify this output and make it beautiful Markdown. Okay? But for now, I would like to help you overcome any problems. And I encourage you to take a look at the code so to make sure that you really understand it. and try different system prompts. Play a little bit with the system prompts. I can help you with any problems. Okay, I like that you have fun with this chatbot. I also find it very funny to work with different system prompts, but don't worry, in your homework is a more serious exercise for prompting. Now, what I particularly dislike in our current implementation is the fact that we simply write Markdown here on the screen. And I don't want to have Markdown. I want to have a beautiful output. So for that, we need some kind of package which is capable of turning Markdown into beautiful HTML code. And I would like to use ngx Markdown. ngx Markdown is a package which is pretty widely used. It's not super widely used, but it's used pretty often. And it combines a very widely used parser for Markdown, which is called Marked. Marked is another NPM package, and it can convert Markdown into HTML. You see, 33,000 stars on GitHub, so that is pretty powerful. But ngx Markdown combines more things. It can, for instance, do syntax highlighting. If the chatbot generates TypeScript code and you would like to have beautiful syntax highlighting in your output, ngx Markdown can do that. And many other things. We are going to stick to the very basics, but take a look at the documentation for ngx Markdown. You might like it. So before the break, we do just one thing. We are going to install ngx Markdown. And for that, we execute exactly that statement that you find on npm. I will copy it for you in your Discord server, so you don't need to look it up. Please go into a terminal and execute npm install ngx Markdown, and you can remove the version of Marked. We can take the latest version of Marked. Just press enter, wait a few moments. That will install ngx Markdown. It should really only take a few moments, and then you have this Markdown generator, this Markdown parser in your application. Please do that and let me know if you have any problems. Now we installed the package. We need to configure the package a little bit. Please go into app.config, and that will be the last step that we do before the break, and after the break we will do the rest of the ngx Markdown configuration. We need to provide a service to Angular dependency injection. Please just add the following to your app config. Markdown service. This is the first thing that we provide. And the second thing, just do what I do. I will tell you in a second what I do here. Provide security context, use value security context dot HTML. Use value, not user value. What this last version does, it is a global configuration in our Angular application, and it tells the Markdown service to always generate safe HTML. So there is no way that somebody is injecting JavaScript code through Markdown into our application. It's a so-called cross-site scripting attack. I don't know if you have heard about that. It's a security feature. This essentially says only generate safe HTML. Okay? By the way, you do not need to remember this. Turning something Markdown into HTML is not something that will come for the exam. Don't worry. But I still thought it would be a nice exercise, especially if we do it for a chatbot, because chatbots always speak Markdown. So just enter these two lines. And when you have entered these two lines, we are ready to include the Markdown parser to our component. Okay? So finish these two lines, and then we have a 5-minute break and complete the rest of, or the last step of our demo in the last hour that we have together. Last and final step after the break, let's add the Markdown conversion to our application. Let's go into the answer question component. And there we will add, after the forms component, the Markdown module. Exactly that one. Oops. The Markdown module. And of course we have to import it from ngx Markdown. Are we good? Markdown module. And once we have the Markdown module, the change in HTML is kind of trivial. Instead of printing directly the answer in a paragraph, we are going to use Markdown and specify data with the answer. And that's it. That's all you need to do. ngx Markdown comes with a ready-made Angular component which allows you to display Markdown in a beautifully rendered HTML. So if I didn't screw up, we should be able to go into our bot, answer again something like, give me a checklist, blah. And if I run this stuff, you see, I get a really nice HTML checklist with everything that I would like to have. Now, if I go to my OpenAI service and change that answer in German again, answer politely and in, I don't know, English, that's fine. And then I say, suggest weekly diet for a healthy lifestyle using a table, something like this. And you see, we get a nice little table exactly as we expected. Of course, we could use CSS to format it even nicer, but I think you get the idea, right? Tell me a joke with many emojis. If I try that, it typically works. That's a dead joke, isn't it? Why did the bicycle fall over? Because it was too tired. Okay. So you see, it should work perfectly fine with Markdown. Does it work?
Yes.
Yes? Nice. Nice, nice. You have a question? A problem. I'll come. Very nice. I like that it works. It seems to work everywhere. So now, what do I want from you from here on? First, in our courses GitHub repository, I have created here under lectures, chatbot, the sample solution that we created together. So you, if you, I think one student missed a little bit of the exercise, and this is the entire example. You can take a look at it, you can clone it, you can try it, okay? That's the first thing. Second thing, for your exam, you will get my entire repository in an offline enabled way. So you can take a look at this code. So you do not need to learn these things by heart. But don't worry, you will not need to create a chatbot in your exam. Last but not least, I have a homework for you. And of course, you can start with the, where is the homework? I haven't checked it in. That's a very good idea. Luckily, I checked it in somewhere else. No, I checked it in somewhere else. I'm sorry. I already gave you this flowerbot repository. Here we are. And in this flowerbot repository, I created a, of course, AI-generated image. I want multiple things from you. First, I ask you to change the logic of the application so that you enable multi-turn conversation. What I mean with that is you can say something, bot answers. You can answer a you can ask a follow-up question, bot answers. Understand what I mean? So a real code ChatGPT if you want. Next, I ask you to create a route which is called system prompt with a single text area input where I can change the system prompt without recompiling the application. So what we get is a similar functionality as we saw it before in ChatGPT, where I have the possibility to customize the system prompt interactively. And this is what I want from you. I want to add a second route where I can manipulate the system prompt. Last but not least, I want you to create a specific bot. I want you to create a bot for a flower shop. This bot needs to fulfill specific purposes. Please read the description of the bot. And for those of you who are bored with this exercise because it's so easy, there is an advanced exercise too. Take a look at it. This is completely optional. You should at least be able to implement step 1 and step 2. I find step 3 very interesting. It's super relevant for your future of programmers. In your future programming career, you will need to do some prompt engineering. You will not just write code. You will need to do some prompt engineering. And that is a good exercise for getting into this topic. I want you to start with this exercise today. Use the rest of the hour and then work on this homework at home. It isn't very complicated. I think you will be able to finish this in an hour or 1.5. And yeah, next time we can discuss certain solutions. Good. I hope you found it interesting. You can start with the homework.